The smell of burnt coffee filled the empty diner as Marcus Thompson watched his newest employee struggle to carry a tray of plates. Something was wrong with the way she moved, each step deliberate, careful, as if every movement caused pain. When she turned to refill the sugar dispensers, he caught sight of something that made his stomach drop. Dark purple bruises wrapped around her thin wrists like twisted bracelets, and there was a yellowing mark along her jawline that makeup couldn't quite hide. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. 18-year-old Kendra Walsh had been working at Thompson's Corner Diner for exactly 3 weeks, and Marcus had noticed things. The way she flinched when customers raised their voices, how she always wore long sleeves even on the hottest August days in Millfield, Ohio, the fact that she never seemed to have anyone pick her up after her shifts disappeared into the night on foot, limping slightly as she made her way down Elm Street. What Marcus didn't know was that in less than 24 hours, this quiet girl with the haunted eyes would be standing in his kitchen at midnight, soaking wet from the thunderstorm outside, asking him a question that would change both their lives forever. The bell above the diner door chimed its familiar tune as the last customer of the night finally left. Marcus Thompson wiped down the counter with practiced efficiency, his movements automatic after 32 years of running the same establishment. At 54, he'd grown accustomed to the rhythm of closing time, the quiet settling of an empty restaurant, the hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of traffic from the interstate. "Kendra, you can head home," he called toward the kitchen, where the young woman was still scrubbing pots with methodical determination. "I'll finish up here." She emerged from the back, untying her apron with careful movements. Marcus noticed again how she favored her left leg, the slight hitch in her step that she tried to disguise. Her sandy brown hair was pulled back in a ponytail that revealed the healing cut on her neck, thin and precise, like someone had drawn a line with a razor. "Are you sure, Mr. Thompson? I can stay and help with the morning prep." Her voice carried a tremor that had nothing to do with fatigue. Marcus had heard that tone before years ago, when his late wife Sarah would offer to work extra shifts at the hospital, just to avoid going home during the worst periods of her father's drinking. "I'm sure. Get some rest." Kendra nodded and gathered her things, a worn backpack that looked like it had seen better days, and a thin jacket that wouldn't provide much protection against the storm clouds gathering outside. Marcus watched her through the window as she stepped into the humid evening air, her silhouette quickly swallowed by the approaching darkness. He'd hired her 3 weeks ago on impulse. She'd walked in during the lunch rush, asking if he needed help, and something about her desperation had struck him. She was clearly underage for serving alcohol, but she could bus tables and help in the kitchen. When he'd asked for references, she'd gone pale and mumbled something about her previous job not working out. He'd given her the position anyway, partly because he was short-staffed and partly because she reminded him of the stray cats Sarah used to feed behind their house, wary, hungry, and trying hard not to show how much they needed help. The first week had been rough. Kendra dropped plates, mixed up orders, and seemed to startle at every unexpected sound. But she worked harder than any employee he'd ever had, staying late without being asked and showing up early to help with prep work. She never complained, never made excuses, and never asked for advances on her paycheck, even though her clothes suggested she needed the money. Marcus finished wiping down the tables and started counting the register. The diner wasn't exactly thriving, hadn't been since the new shopping complex opened on the other side of town, but it kept him busy and paid the bills. After Sarah's death 2 years ago, he'd needed the routine, the familiar faces of regular customers, the simple satisfaction of feeding people. Thunder rumbled in the distance as he locked the front door and headed to his truck. The parking lot was empty except for his old Ford and Mrs. Chun's sedan. She lived in the apartment above the hardware store next door and sometimes worked late doing inventory. As he drove through the quiet streets of Millfield, Marcus found himself thinking about Kendra again. Something wasn't right in her life, that much was obvious, but he'd learned not to pry into his employees' personal business. Still, the Bruises bothered him. His house sat at the end of Maple Drive, a modest two-story colonial that he and Sarah had bought when they were newlyweds. The garden she'd lovingly tended was now overgrown with weeds, and the white picket fence needed painting. He'd been meaning to tackle these projects for months, but somehow never found the motivation. Inside, the silence felt heavier than usual. He microwaved leftover meatloaf and ate it standing at the kitchen counter, staring out at the backyard where Sarah's roses struggled against the encroaching brambles. They'd never had children. Sarah's idea initially, then later a source of quiet regret when they realized it might be too late. Now at 54, Marcus sometimes wondered what his life might have looked like with a family to come home to. The storm hit around 11 o'clock, transforming the gentle evening shower into a fierce downpour that rattled the windows and sent tree branches scraping against the roof. Marcus was settling into his recliner with a book when his phone rang. Thompson's Corner Diner, he answered automatically, then realized how odd that sounded given the hour silence on the other end, followed by what might have been sniffling. "Hello, Mr. Thompson?" The voice was small, barely audible over the storm. "It's Kendra, from the diner." "Kendra, what's wrong? Are you all right?" A long pause. I'm sorry to bother you. I know it's late. I just I didn't know who else to call." Marcus sat up straighter. "Where are you?" "I'm at the diner. I was walking past and I saw there's someone inside with a flashlight. I think someone broke in. Stay right where you are. Don't go near the building. I'm on my way." Marcus grabbed his keys and jacket, his mind racing. The diner didn't keep much cash on hand. He made daily deposits at the bank, but the equipment was worth something. More importantly, if Kendra had surprised a burglar, she could be in danger. The drive took less than 10 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. Rain hammered his windshield, and twice he had to swerve around fallen branches. When he pulled into the diner's parking lot, his headlights swept across a figure huddled beside the building's entrance. Kendra stood pressed against the brick wall, soaked to the skin despite the narrow overhang that provided minimal shelter. Marcus jumped out of his truck and ran to her. Up close, he could see she was shaking, whether from cold or fear, he couldn't tell. "Are they still inside?" he shouted over the storm. Kendra shook her head. "They left about 5 minutes ago, went out the back." Marcus pulled out his phone too. "Call the police," but Kendra grabbed his wrist. "Please don't," she said urgently. "Not yet. Can we check what they took first?" Something in her voice made him hesitate. "Kendra, if someone broke into my restaurant, please, Mr. Thompson, just 5 minutes." Against his better judgment, Marcus nodded. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside, flicking on the lights. The diner looked exactly as he'd left it, tables wiped clean, chairs stacked, register closed. Nothing seemed disturbed. They walked through to the kitchen, and again everything appeared normal. The back door was still locked, showing no signs of forced entry. "I don't understand," Marcus said, turning to face Kendra. "Are you sure you saw someone?" He stopped mid-sentence. In the fluorescent lighting of the kitchen, Kendra's condition was impossible to ignore. Her lip was split and swollen. A fresh bruise darkened her left cheek. Her clothes were torn in several places, and now that her wet hair was plastered to her head, he could see finger-shaped marks on her neck. "Jesus Christ, Kendra, what happened to you?" She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly looking even younger than 18. "I lied about the break-in. I'm sorry. I just ... I needed somewhere to go, and I saw your number on the employee bulletin board." Marcus felt a familiar anger building in his chest, not at her, but at whoever had done this. "Who did this to you?" "It doesn't matter now." Her voice was flat, emotionless. He's gone. Gone where? Just gone, for good this time. She looked up at him with eyes that held too much knowledge for someone her age. My mom died 6 months ago. Cancer. After that, I had to move in with my stepdad. Ray Hutchins. He was... She trailed off, unable or unwilling to finish the sentence. Marcus didn't need her to spell it out. The pieces were falling into place, the bruises, the flinching, the way she always seemed to be looking over her shoulder. Where will you go now? I don't know. The admission seemed to cost her something. I've been staying at the Riverside motel when I could afford it, but I'm out of money. I spent my last $20 on the room last night, and Ray found me there this morning. He said ... She shuddered. He said a lot of things. Then he started hitting me, and I fought back. And he fell and hit his head on the bathroom sink. Marcus felt his blood turn cold. Is he? Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He's breathing, I checked. But he's going to have a hell of a headache when he wakes. Up. She looked directly at him then, and he saw a flicker of something that might have been satisfaction. I took his truck. I left it at the mall and walked there. I don't think he'll follow me anymore, but I can't go back to that motel. I can't go anywhere. The storm continued to rage outside, punctuating the silence that stretched between them. Marcus found himself thinking about Sarah, about how she'd never hesitated to help someone in need. She'd have already been making up the guest room and putting out a pot of coffee. You can't stay at the diner, he said finally. Kendra's face fell. I know, I'm sorry for lying. I'll figure something out. You can't stay at the diner, Marcus repeated, because it's not safe. No locks on the windows, and if this Ray character comes looking for you, it's the first place he'll check. Hope flickered in her eyes, quickly suppressed as if she'd learned not to trust it. But I have a guest room at my house that nobody's used in 2 years. It's not much, but it's got a lock on the door, and it's warm and dry. The words hung in the air between them. Marcus couldn't quite believe he'd said them. He barely knew this girl, and inviting a stranger into his home went against every practical instinct he'd developed over 5 decades of life. But looking at her soaked, bruised, and trying so hard to appear strong, he knew he couldn't walk away. I can't pay you, Kendra said quietly. I mean, not right away. But I could work extra shifts, help with more than just the diner. I could clean your house, do yard work, whatever you need. We'll figure out the details later. Right now, let's get you somewhere safe and dry. As they prepared to leave the diner, Kendra turned to him with an expression he couldn't quite read. Mr. Thompson, can I ask you something? Of course. If I'm really careful, and I work really hard, and I don't cause any trouble ... She paused, gathering courage. Could I maybe stay forever? I mean, not forever, but until I figure out what comes next. I don't have anywhere else to go, and I've never had anyone who... She stopped, unable to finish. Marcus looked at this damaged young woman who was trying so hard to be strong, and he thought about his empty house with its unused guest room and overgrown garden. He thought about Sarah, who would have already said yes without hesitation. He thought about the stray cats she used to feed, and how some of them had eventually stopped running away. Let's start with tonight, he said gently. Then we'll see what tomorrow brings. As they stepped back into the storm, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that his carefully ordered life was about to become much more complicated. But for the first time in 2 years, the prospect of going home didn't fill him with the familiar weight of loneliness. Neither of them noticed the figure watching from across the street, standing in the shadow of the abandoned gas station, rain streaming off his baseball cap as he memorized. The license plate of Marcus's truck. The guest room hadn't been touched since Sarah's sister visited for the funeral 2 years ago. Marcus flipped on the overhead light, revealing faded floral wallpaper and a single bed covered with one of Sarah's handmade quilts. Dust motes danced in the yellow glow, and the air smelled stale despite his efforts to keep the house clean. "The bathroom's right across the hall," he said, setting fresh towels on the dresser. "There should be hot water, and I think Sarah left some extra toiletries in the medicine cabinet." Kendra stood in the doorway, still dripping rainwater onto the hardwood floor. She seemed smaller somehow in the confines of his house, like a wild animal suddenly caged. Her eyes darted around the room, taking in every detail: the window that faced the backyard, the solid wooden door, the old-fashioned key that still worked in the lock. "Thank you," she whispered, and Marcus heard years of exhaustion in those two words. "I'll be downstairs if you need anything. Kitchen's at the end of the hall if you get hungry." He started to leave, then turned back. "Kendra, lock the door if it makes you feel safer. I won't be offended." She nodded, already reaching for the key before he'd finished speaking. Downstairs, Marcus made coffee he didn't want and sat at his kitchen table, staring at the phone. He should call the police. A young woman had been assaulted, possibly by someone who might come looking for her. But something held him back, maybe the way she'd flinched when he'd mentioned calling for help, or the desperate hope in her voice when she'd asked if she could stay. The sound of running water from upstairs told him she'd found the shower. Marcus tried to focus on practical matters. Tomorrow was Friday, which meant the breakfast rush would be busier than usual. He'd need to call his part-time cook, Danny Martinez, to see if he could cover the morning shift while Marcus figured out what to do about Kendra's situation. The water stopped running, and the house settled back into its familiar silence. Marcus found himself listening for sounds from upstairs footsteps, doors closing, any indication that he wasn't alone anymore. It struck him how quickly he'd grown accustomed to the emptiness after Sarah's death, how the absence of another person's presence had become his normal. Around 2 in the morning, he heard soft footsteps on the stairs. Marcus looked up from his coffee cup to find Kendra standing in the kitchen doorway, wearing an oversized t-shirt and a pair of sweatpants that must have belonged to Sarah. Her wet hair was combed back from her face, revealing the full extent of her injuries. Without makeup and in the harsh fluorescent lighting, she looked even younger, and the bruises looked even worse. "I couldn't sleep," she said, hovering uncertainly in the doorway. "Neither could I. Want some coffee?" She shook her head. "Could I maybe have some water? And if you have any aspirin?" Marcus was already moving toward the medicine cabinet. "When did you eat last?" "Yesterday morning, I think. Ray didn't like me eating much. Said I was getting fat." She touched her ribs unconsciously, and Marcus noticed how the borrowed clothes hung loose on her thin frame. "Sit down, I'll make you something." "You don't have to sit down, Kendra." She perched on the edge of a kitchen chair while Marcus rummaged through his refrigerator. Sarah had always been the cook in their relationship, but he'd learned the basics since her death. Scrambled eggs, toast, some leftover bacon from yesterday's breakfast special. Simple food, but it would put some calories into her. As he cooked, Kendra spoke quietly from behind him. "I keep waiting for him to show up. Every time I hear a car engine or a door slam, I think it's Ray coming to drag me back." "Has he hurt you before?" The question hung in the air while Marcus cracked eggs into the heated pan. "Since the day Mom died," Kendra said finally. "At first it was just grabbing too hard, you know. Bruises on my arms where he'd hold me when he was talking. Mom used to get those too, but she always made excuses. Then after the funeral, when it was just me and him." Marcus set a plate of food in front of her and sat down across the table. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. I want to tell someone. I've been carrying it around for 6 months, and it's like ... like poison." She picked up a piece of toast but didn't eat it. "Ray moved in with us when I was 16. Mom met him at the factory where she worked before she got sick. He seemed nice enough at first. Brought her flowers, fixed things around the house. But after they got married. She paused, finally taking a small bite of toast. Mom got diagnosed with lung cancer last year. Never smoked a day in her life, but the doctor said sometimes it just happens. Ray acted like he was being such a good husband, taking care of her, but really he was just angry all the time. Angry at her for being sick, angry at me for existing, angry at the world for dealing him a bad hand. Marcus watched her eat with mechanical precision, as if she'd trained herself to consume food efficiently rather than enjoy it. When she was in the hospital those last few weeks, Ray started drinking more, coming home from work already drunk, passing out on the couch. I thought maybe things would be better that way. Him unconscious was safer than him awake and looking for someone to blame. But then Mom died, and it was just us in that house. The kitchen fell silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sound of rain still pattering against the windows. The first time he hit me was 3 days after the funeral. I'd been crying, not even loudly, just quiet tears while I was doing dishes, and he said I was being dramatic. Said Mom was better off dead than married to a useless daughter like me. When I told him to shut up... She touched her cheek unconsciously. He backhanded me so hard I saw stars. Marcus felt his hands clench into fists under the table. What? About other family? Friends? Teachers? Mom was an only child, and her parents died when I was little. Ray's got a brother in Kentucky, but they haven't spoken in years. As for friends... She laughed bitterly. Try maintaining friendships when you're constantly making excuses for why you can't go out, why you've got bruises, why your stepfather needs to know where you are every second of the day. You graduated high school? Barely. Ray didn't want me going to college, said it was a waste of money, and I wasn't smart enough anyway. I had a scholarship offer to Ohio State, but he wouldn't sign the financial aid forms. Said if I tried to leave, he'd make sure I never saw a penny of Mom's life insurance money. Marcus pushed his coffee cup around in circles, processing everything she'd told him. How much money are we talking about? $50,000. Not a fortune, but enough to get me started somewhere. Ray's got control of it until I turn 21, or until I get married. She said the last part with particular venom. He used to joke about that. Said maybe he'd find me a nice husband who'd take me off his hands. The implications of that statement made Marcus's stomach turn. Kendra, did Ray ever touch you inappropriately? She was quiet for so long that Marcus thought she wasn't going to answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely audible. He tried last month. He'd been drinking, and he came into my room around midnight. Started saying things about how I looked like Mom when she was younger, how lonely he'd been since she died. I locked myself in the bathroom and stayed there until morning. The next day he acted like nothing happened, but after that... She shivered. After that, I started sleeping with a knife under my pillow. Marcus stood up abruptly, needing to move, needing to do something with the rage building in his chest. He'd known men like Ray Hutchins bullies who preyed on anyone, smaller and weaker, who used their fists to solve problems they'd created with their failures. What happened tonight? He asked. You said he fell and hit his head. I'd been hiding out at the Riverside Motel for 3 days, paying cash from my tips at the diner. But Ray must have been watching the place, because he showed up this morning around 10. Kicked in the door like he owned it. Started screaming about how I was an ungrateful little bitch, how I belonged to him until I turned 21. Kendra pushed the eggs around on her plate, her appetite clearly gone. He grabbed me by the hair and started dragging me toward his truck. Said he was taking me home and I was going to learn some respect. But I've been working at the diner for 3 weeks, and my arms are stronger now from all the lifting and carrying. When he tried to push me into the truck, I shoved back as hard as I could. And he fell backwards into the motel room. Hit his head on the corner of the bathroom sink. There was blood, but he was still breathing. I grabbed his keys and his wallet and ran. Marcus returned to his seat, trying to piece together the timeline. That was this morning? Around 10:30. I drove his truck to the mall and left it in the parking lot, then walked around town for hours trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't go back to the motel. Ray would look there first when he woke up. I couldn't go to the police because then they'd want to know about the money, and Ray would just tell them I was a runaway who stole his truck. So you came to the diner. I remembered seeing your phone number on the employee bulletin board. I thought maybe ... She trailed off, looking embarrassed. I thought maybe you'd let me sleep in the storage room or something. Just for one night. Until I could figure out where to go next. Marcus reached across the table and gently touched her hand. You don't have to figure it out alone anymore. She looked up at him with eyes that held too much pain for someone so young. Why are you helping me? You barely know me. It was a fair question, and Marcus found himself thinking about Sarah again. Not just her kindness to strays and lost causes, but something she'd said during her final week in the hospital. She'd been worried about him, about what would happen to him alone in that big house with nothing but memories and regrets for company. Maybe I need the help as much as you do, he said quietly. They sat in comfortable silence while Kendra finished her food. Outside, the storm was finally beginning to weaken, the thunder moving off toward the east. It was nearly 3 in the morning, and Marcus could see exhaustion weighing down her shoulders despite the coffee and conversation. You should try to get some sleep, he said. Tomorrow we'll figure out next steps. She nodded and started to stand, then hesitated. Mr. Thompson, what if Ray comes looking for me here? Then he'll have to deal with me. Something in his tone must have convinced her, because she relaxed slightly. What if the police come? What if Ray reports his truck stolen? We'll handle that when it happens. You're not going back to him, Kendra, whatever it takes. As she headed toward the stairs, Marcus called after her. And Kendra? You can call me Marcus. Mr. Thompson makes me feel old. She almost smiled at that. Good night, Marcus. After she'd gone upstairs, Marcus sat alone in his kitchen and tried to process everything that had happened in the past few hours. This morning, he'd been a lonely widower running a failing diner, and now he had a traumatized teenager living in his guest room and a potentially violent man who might come looking for her. Thought the smart thing would be to call the police in the morning. Report the assault, let the authorities handle Ray Hutchins and the question of Kendra's guardianship. But Marcus had spent enough time in small towns to know how these things usually played out. Kendra would end up in foster care or a group home. Ray would get a slap on the wrist for assault, and the $50,000 would disappear into legal fees and bureaucratic delays. No, there had to be a better way. Kendra was 18, legally an adult, even if she didn't feel like one. She had job skills and a work ethic that most adults would envy. What she needed was time to heal, both physically and emotionally, and a safe place to figure out her next steps. Marcus finished his coffee and checked the locks on all the doors before heading upstairs. As he passed the guest room, he could see light under the door and hear the soft sound of crying. He paused, wanting to comfort her, but knowing she needed space to process everything that had happened. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight Kendra Walsh was safe and warm and fed. For now, that would have to be enough. As Marcus finally settled into his own bed, he found himself thinking about the figure he'd glimpsed watching them from across the street at the diner. At the time, he'd been too focused on getting Kendra to safety to give it much thought. But now, in the quiet darkness of his bedroom, the memory nagged at him. Had someone really been there? Or was it just his imagination playing tricks in the storm? And if someone had been watching, who was it, and what did they want? I slept for a long time. Marcus woke to the smell of bacon frying and the unfamiliar sound of someone moving around in his kitchen. For a disorienting moment, he thought Sarah had somehow returned, that the past 2 years had been nothing but a terrible dream. Then reality crashed back as he remembered the events of the previous night. The bedside clock read 6:47 a.m. He'd managed. Maybe 3 hours of sleep, but his body was already responding to decades of early morning routine. Downstairs, he found Kendra standing at the stove, fully dressed in her work clothes from yesterday. She'd attempted to cover the worst of her facial bruises with makeup, but the swelling around her left eye was impossible to hide. "You didn't have to cook," Marcus said, accepting the cup of coffee she offered him. "I wanted to. Besides, you need to get to the diner soon, right? The breakfast rush?" She was right, but something about her eagerness to return to normal routines worried him. "Kendra, you don't have to work today. Take some time to rest, figure things out. I need to work." Her voice carried a note of desperation that made Marcus look at her more closely. "I can't just sit around thinking about everything. I need to stay busy." Marcus understood the impulse. After Sarah's death, he'd thrown himself into the diner with manic intensity, working 16-hour days just to avoid the empty house and his own thoughts. But Kendra's situation was different. She was running from immediate physical danger. "Not just grief. At least let me drive you to work. And we're taking the back roads." She nodded gratefully. As they ate breakfast, Marcus found himself studying her face, memorizing the pattern of bruises. If Ray Hutchins showed up at the diner looking for her, Marcus wanted to be able to document exactly what the man had done. The drive to Thompson's Corner diner took them through the older part of Millfield, past houses that had seen better days, and vacant lots where businesses used to thrive. It was 7:30 when they pulled into the parking lot, and Marcus was relieved to see Danny Martinez's beat-up Honda already there. His part-time cook was reliable, if not particularly ambitious. "Danny's here early," Kendra observed, and Marcus detected relief in her voice. The presence of another employee would make her feel safer. Inside the diner, Danny looked up from the grill where he was preparing for the breakfast rush. He was a stocky man in his 40s, a former line cook from Columbus who'd moved to Millfield for cheaper rent and a slower pace of life. His eyes widened when he saw Kendra's face. "Jesus, what happened to you?" "Car accident," Kendra said quickly, the lie rolling off her tongue with practiced ease. "I'm fine, just looks worse than it is." Danny didn't seem convinced, but he knew better than to pry. "Well, be careful around the fryer today. You don't want to add burns to whatever else you got going on." Marcus spent the morning watching Kendra work, marveling at her ability to function normally despite everything she'd endured. She moved through her tasks with mechanical precision, refilling coffee cups, taking orders, clearing tables. But he noticed how she positioned herself to keep the kitchen door in sight at all times, and how she flinched whenever the front bell chimed to announce a new customer. Around 10 o'clock, Police Chief Janet Reeves walked in for her usual coffee. And Danish. Janet was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s who'd taken over the department when the previous chief retired 3 years ago. She'd grown up in Millfield and knew everyone's business, which made Marcus nervous as she settled onto her usual stool at the counter. "Morning, Marcus. How's business? Can't complain." He poured her coffee, trying to act normal while Kendra worked tables behind him. "Quiet night last night with the storm." "The storm brought us some excitement, actually. Got a call around 11 this morning about a truck abandoned at the mall. Turns out it belongs to Ray Hutchins. You know Ray? Lives out on County Road 15. Marcus kept his expression neutral. "The name sounds familiar. Guy's got a history. Drunk and disorderly. Couple of domestic calls when he was married to Linda Walsh. The poor woman died of cancer last year." Janet stirred sugar into her coffee. "Anyway, Ray shows up at the station this morning with a bandage on his head, claiming someone stole his truck. Says his stepdaughter attacked him and ran off with his vehicle. That's terrible." Marcus glanced toward Kendra, who was wiping down a table with intense concentration, clearly listening to every word. "The thing is, Ray's story doesn't quite add up," says the girl. "Kendra, I think her name went crazy and hit him with a lamp or something. But the injury on his head looks more like he fell and hit something sharp. Plus, he smells like a brewery, and it's not even noon yet. Janet paused to take a sip of coffee, studying Marcus's face. Don't suppose you've seen this Kendra girl around? Ray seems to think she might try to find work somewhere in town. The question hung in the air like a loaded gun. Marcus felt the weight of decision settling on his shoulders. He could tell Janet the truth right now, let the authorities handle Ray Hutchins and sort out Kendra's situation through proper legal channels. Or he could protect the frightened young woman who'd asked him if she could stay forever. Can't say that I have, Marcus said finally. But if she shows up looking for work, should I call you? Might be a good idea. Ray's pretty worked up about the whole thing. Claims she's got some kind of mental problem, that she's dangerous. Of course, Ray says a lot of things when he's been drinking. Janet finished her coffee and left money on the counter. As she headed for the door, she paused and looked back at Marcus. You know, if this girl is running from something, she'd be smart to get as far away from Millfield as possible. Ray Hutchins isn't the kind of man who gives up easily, especially when money's involved. I heard Linda had a decent life insurance policy. After Janet left, the diner felt charged with tension. Kendra continued working, but Marcus could see the strain in her movements. The way she kept glancing toward the windows, as if expecting Ray to appear at any moment. The lunch rush provided a welcome distraction. The diner is filled with its usual collection of retirees, factory workers, and travelers from the interstate. Marcus found himself grateful for the familiar rhythm of orders and conversation. The simple task of feeding people and making change. It was just after 2:00 when everything changed. Marcus was in the kitchen checking inventory when he heard the sound that had been haunting his nightmares, a truck engine roaring into the parking lot, followed by the slam of a heavy door. Through the service window, he saw Kendra freeze in the middle of clearing a table, her face going pale beneath the makeup. The front door burst open with enough force to rattle the windows. Ray Hutchins stood in the entrance, and Marcus's first thought was that the man looked exactly like what he'd expected: average height, thick around the middle, with the ruddy complexion and bloodshot eyes of a chronic drinker. A white bandage covered the left side of his forehead, and his clothes looked like he'd slept in them. Where is she? Ray's voice carried across the diner, silencing conversations and drawing stares from the handful of customers. Marcus stepped out of the kitchen, positioning himself between Ray and Kendra. Can I help you? I'm looking for my stepdaughter. A little bitch stole my truck and ran off. Somebody said they saw her around here. I'm going to have to ask you to keep your voice down. This is a family restaurant. Ray's eyes swept the diner until they landed on Kendra, who had backed against the far wall near the coffee station. A smile spread across his face, but there was nothing pleasant about it. There you are. Come on, we're going home. I'm not going anywhere with you. Kendra's voice was steadier than Marcus had expected, but he could see her hands shaking. The hell you're not. You're 18 years old with no money and no place to go. You belong to me until you turn 21, and if you think some middle-aged loser running a failing diner is going to protect you, you're stupider than I thought. Marcus felt anger flare in his chest. You need to leave now. Ray laughed, a harsh sound that made several customers shift uncomfortably in their seats. Or what? You gonna call the cops? Go ahead. I already talked to Chief Reeves this morning. Told her all about how my mentally unstable stepdaughter attacked me and stole my truck. Amazing how sympathetic people get when you show them a head injury. The casual confidence in Ray's voice told Marcus everything he needed to know about how this man had operated for years, always one step ahead, always with a plausible story to explain away his victims' injuries. Kendra, get your things. We're leaving. Ray took a step into the diner, and Marcus moved to block his path. She's an adult. She can make her own decisions. She's my responsibility until she turns 21. That's what the court papers say. And that's what Linda's will says. You want to interfere with a legal guardianship? Be my guest. But when this is all over, you'll be the one facing charges. Marcus felt a chill of uncertainty. He had no idea what legal authority Ray might actually have over Kendra, but the man's confidence suggested he'd done his homework. It's okay, Marcus. Kendra's voice was small, defeated. I'll go with him. No. The word came out harder than Marcus had intended. You don't have to go anywhere you don't want to go. Ray's face darkened. Listen here, old man. This ain't your business. That girl is mine until she's 21, or until she gets married, whichever comes first. That's $50,000 in life insurance money we're talking about, and I'll be damned if I'm gonna let some stranger interfere with family business. The admission hung in the air like a confession. Ray had just revealed his true motivation. In front of a room full of witnesses, this wasn't about concern for Kendra's welfare. It was about controlling her access to her mother's money. Danny, Marcus called toward the kitchen without taking his eyes off Ray. Call the police. You sure? You want to do that? Ray's voice carried a threatening edge. Because when they get here, I'm going to tell them about how you've been harboring a mentally unstable girl who attacked her guardian and stole his vehicle. How you've been interfering with a legal custodial arrangement. How you probably had inappropriate intentions toward a vulnerable young woman. The implication hit Marcus like a physical blow. He could see how easily Ray could twist the situation, how a lonely widower taking in an attractive teenager might look to outsiders who didn't know the whole story. But as Marcus looked at Kendra, saw the terror in her eyes and the fresh bruises on her face, he realized he didn't care what Ray might say or what legal complications might follow. Some things were worth fighting for, regardless of the cost. Danny, make that call. Ray's expression shifted from confident to dangerous. You're making a big mistake, old man. Bigger than you know. The next few minutes passed in tense silence. Ray remained near the door, occasionally muttering threats under his breath. Kendra stayed pressed against the far wall, looking like she might bolt at any moment. The remaining customers sat frozen in their seats, uncertain whether to stay or leave. When Chief Reeves arrived, she took one look at the scene and sighed heavily. Ray, what are you doing here? Getting my stepdaughter back. This man's been hiding her from me. Janet turned to Marcus with raised eyebrows. That true? Marcus chose his words carefully. Kendra came to me for help last night. She was injured and had nowhere else to go. And you didn't think to call the police? She asked me not to. She was scared. Janet studied Kendra's face, taking in the bruises that makeup couldn't hide. Scared of what? Before Kendra could answer, Ray jumped in. She's been having mental health issues since her mother died. Making up stories, getting violent. That's how I got this. He pointed to the bandage on his forehead. Kendra, Janet's voice was gentler now. What happened to your face? The moment stretched out like a held breath. Marcus could see Kendra weighing her options, trying to decide whether to trust the law or protect herself the only way she knew how. Finally, she straightened her shoulders and looked Janet directly in the eyes. Ray Hutchins has been beating me since the day my mother died. Last night he tried to double quotes. She paused, gathering courage. He tried to rape me. When I fought him off, he hit his head. I took his truck and came here because I had nowhere else to go. The words fell like stones into still water, creating ripples. That would change everything. Ray's face went through several color changes before settling on an unhealthy shade of red. She's lying. She's been making up stories for months. Ask anyone, ask Dr. Patterson, her mother's oncologist. He'll tell you about the delusions, the attention-seeking behavior. But Janet was studying the bruises on Kendra's face with professional interest, and Marcus could see the moment when the police chief's expression shifted from skeptical to concerned. Ray, I'm going to need you to step outside while I talk to Miss Walsh. This is bullshit. She's my responsibility, and I'm not leaving. Without her. Ray, outside, now. The authority in Janet's voice brooked no argument. Ray shot one last poisonous look at Kendra before stalking out of the diner. As the door closed behind him, Marcus felt the atmosphere in the restaurant shift. The immediate danger had passed, but he had a feeling the real battle was just beginning. Janet Reeves had been a police officer for 23 years, and she'd developed an instinct for recognizing the difference between genuine trauma and manufactured drama. As she studied Kendra Walsh's injuries in the harsh fluorescent lighting of the diner, every alarm bell in her professional experience was ringing. "These bruises," Janet said quietly, pulling out her phone to take photos. "Can you tell me when they happened?" Kendra's hands trembled as she touched her swollen cheek. "The worst ones were from yesterday morning. But some of them are older. He's been hurting me for months. And you never reported it? Who would believe me?" Ray's good at making excuses. He told people I was acting out because of grief, that I was having behavioral problems. And he controls my mother's life insurance money. He made sure I knew that if I caused trouble, I'd never see a penny of it. Janet nodded grimly. Financial control was one of the classic tools of abuse, and Linda Walsh's life insurance policy gave Ray Hutchins significant leverage over her daughter. "What about last night specifically? Ray says you attacked him." Kendra's voice grew stronger as she recounted the events at the Riverside Motel. "He found where I was staying and kicked in the door. I started screaming about how I belonged to him, how I was going to learn respect. When he tried to force me into his truck, I pushed him away and he fell backward." "Did you intend to hurt him?" "I intended to get away from him before he..." Kendra's voice broke and she couldn't finish the sentence. Janet's expression softened. "Before he what, honey?" "Before he did what he tried to do last month. He came into my room drunk and started talking about how lonely he'd been, how I reminded him of my mother when she was young. I locked myself in the bathroom until morning, but after that... She shuddered. "After that, I knew it was just a matter of time." Through the window, Janet could see Ray pacing in the parking lot, occasionally kicking at gravel and gesturing angrily at his truck. His body language screamed volatility, the kind of barely contained rage that exploded at unexpected moments. "Marcus," Janet said, turning to the diner owner. "How long has Kendra been working here?" 3 weeks. She's been a good employee, reliable, hardworking. Never any trouble. And you noticed the bruises?" Marcus nodded. "I noticed she always wore long sleeves, that she flinched when people raised their voices. I should have said something sooner. Don't blame yourself. Victims of domestic abuse often go to great lengths to hide what's happening." Janet's radio crackled with static and she lowered the volume. "The problem we have now is that Ray does have legal guardianship papers. Linda Walsh will specifically name him as Kendra's guardian until she turns 21. Kendra's face fell. "So you have to make me go with him?" "Not necessarily. If I have reasonable suspicion that a guardian is abusing their ward, I can intervene. And these photos of your injuries give me plenty of reasonable suspicion." Janet slipped her phone back into her pocket. "But I need to be honest with you. This is going to get complicated fast. Ray's going to lawyer up, and guardianship cases can drag on for months. What does that mean for Kendra in the meantime?" Marcus asked. "Ideally, we'd place her in protective custody while the courts sort things out. But given her age and the circumstances... Janet paused, considering options. There might be another way. She pulled out a business card and handed it to Marcus. "My sister runs a women's shelter in Columbus. It's not just for domestic violence victims. They also help young adults transitioning out of abusive situations. If Kendra agrees to go there voluntarily, it would buy us time to build a case against Ray." Kendra took the card with shaking hands. "How long would I have to stay?" "However long it takes. Could be weeks, could be months. I won't lie to you, it won't be easy. But you'd be safe. and you'd have access to counselors and legal advocates who specialize in these situations. The prospect of leaving Millfield clearly terrified Kendra. Marcus could see her struggling between the desire for safety and the fear of losing the only stability she'd found since her mother's death. "What about my job?" she asked. "I need to work. I need to feel useful." "The shelter has programs for that too. Job training, education assistance. They could help you figure out what you want to do next." Marcus found himself fighting the urge to offer alternatives. The rational part of his mind knew that Janet's suggestion made sense. A professional shelter with trained staff and legal resources would be far better equipped to help Kendra than he could be. But the protective instinct that had awakened in him the night before rebelled against the idea of sending her away. "Can I think about it?" Kendra asked. "Of course." "But Kendra," Janet's voice carried a note of urgency, "you can't go back to Ray, not after what you've told me. If you won't go to the shelter, I'll have to find somewhere else to place you, and your options in Millfield are pretty limited." Through the window, they could see Ray approaching the diner again, his face set in determined lines. Janet sighed and headed for the door. "Stay here," she told Kendra. "I'll handle this." The conversation in the parking lot was brief but heated. Marcus watched through the window as Janet spoke firmly to Ray, who gestured wildly and pointed repeatedly at the diner. Finally, Ray threw his hands up in disgust and stalked back to his truck. Janet returned looking grim. "I've told him he's not to come within 50 feet of Kendra while I investigate her allegations. But a restraining order is just a piece of paper. It won't stop him if he's determined to cause trouble." "What did he say?" Marcus asked. "What you'd expect. He's the victim here. Kendra's mentally unstable. He's going to sue everyone involved for interfering with his parental rights. Oh, and he's hiring a lawyer." The lunch crowd had thinned out during the confrontation, leaving only a few customers who were trying very hard to pretend they hadn't witnessed the entire drama. Danny Martinez emerged from the kitchen, where he'd been conspicuously absent during Ray's visit. "Everything okay out here?" "Just fine, Danny. Thanks for staying in the back." Danny nodded and returned to his prep work, but Marcus could tell the older man was rattled. Violence and police visits were bad for business, especially in a small town where gossip traveled faster than news. Janet finished taking Kendra's statement and gathered contact information from Marcus. "I'll need to file a formal report, which means this is going to become public record. Ray's version of events will be in there too, so be prepared for some controversy." "What kind of controversy?" "Small-town politics. Ray's got friends, people who knew Linda and might not want to believe her husband was abusing her daughter. There'll be folks who think you're a middle-aged man taking advantage of a vulnerable teenager. Others who wonder why a girl would make such serious accusations." Marcus felt a chill of apprehension. He'd lived in Millfield his entire adult life, had built his reputation slowly and carefully. The thought of that reputation being destroyed by gossip and innuendo was terrifying. But then he looked at Kendra, still huddled near the coffee station with Janet's business card clutched in her hands, and realized his reputation was a small price to pay for her safety. "We'll deal with whatever comes," he said firmly. After Janet left, the diner felt hollow and strange. The remaining customers finished their meals quickly and left, clearly uncomfortable with the lingering tension. Marcus found himself alone with Kendra and Danny, unsure how to proceed. "You should go to Columbus," Danny said suddenly from behind the grill. "Both of you. This town's going to eat you alive once word gets out." Marcus looked at his part-time cook in surprise. Danny usually avoided getting involved in personal drama, preferring to focus on his work and collect his paycheck. "What do you mean?" "I mean Ray Hutchins isn't going to give up, and he's got more friends in this town than you might think. Linda Welsh was well-liked, but Ray's been spinning stories about Kendra for months. People are going to take sides. And it won't be pretty." Kendra spoke up from across the room. I can't ask Marcus to leave his business because of me. What business? Danny's laugh was bitter. Marcus, you've been losing money for 2 years. The health inspector's going to be sniffing around soon. The equipment needs replacing, and half your regular customers have moved away or died. You've been holding on out of stubbornness, not profit. The blunt assessment stung because it was largely true. Marcus had been running Thompson's Corner Diner more out of habit than business sense, using it as a distraction from his grief rather than a sustainable enterprise. Besides, Danny continued, what's keeping you here? Sarah's gone, you don't have kids, your brother lives in Phoenix. Sometimes life gives you a reason to start over, and maybe this is yours. The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Start over. At 54, with a failing business and a complicated situation involving an abused teenager who'd asked if she could stay forever. I can't just run away, Marcus said. It's not running away if you're running toward something better. Kendra looked between them, confusion clear on her bruised face. You'd really consider leaving? Because of me? Marcus found himself thinking about the empty house on Maple Drive, the overgrown garden, the unused guest room that had become a shrine to better times. What was he really holding on to? Memories? Habits? The fear of change? Let me ask you something, he said to Kendra. If you could go anywhere, do anything, what would you choose? She was quiet for a long moment, considering. I always wanted to see the ocean. Mom used to talk about taking a trip to California someday, but we never had the money. And I wanted to go to college, study something useful like nursing or teaching. What's stopping you? Ray, the guardianship, the money he controls. But what if those weren't factors? What if you were completely free to choose? Hope flickered in her eyes, quickly suppressed. I don't know. I've been focused on survival for so long, I forgot about having dreams. Marcus made a decision that surprised him with its clarity. Then maybe it's time to remember. He walked to the office behind the kitchen and pulled out the folder containing his business records. The numbers told the story. Danny had already outlined declining revenue, increasing expenses, a business that was slowly dying despite his efforts to keep it alive. When he returned to the dining room, Kendra and Danny were watching him expectantly. The diner's been losing money for 2 years, Marcus said. I've got enough in savings to last maybe 6 months if I shut down today, but if I sold the equipment and the building, he did quick mental calculations. I could probably clear $40,000 after paying off the remaining debts. That's not exactly retirement money, Danny pointed out. No, but it's enough to start over somewhere else. Maybe somewhere with better opportunities for both of us. Kendra stared at him in disbelief. You'd really do that? Give up everything you've built here? Marcus looked around the diner at the cracked vinyl booths, the outdated equipment, the faded photographs of Millfield's better days. What had he really built here except a monument to the past? Maybe it's time to build something new. The sound of a truck engine roaring to life in the parking lot interrupted their conversation. Through the window, they could see Ray's vehicle speeding away, gravel flying from under his tires. He'll be back, Danny said quietly, and next time he might not come alone. Marcus nodded, understanding the implicit warning. Ray Hutchins was the type of man who escalated rather than retreated, especially when his control was threatened. The confrontation with Chief Reeves had been a temporary setback, not a defeat. How long do you think we have? Marcus asked. Until he gets back. From seeing his lawyer? Maybe a few hours, maybe until tomorrow morning. Marcus turned to Kendra. The offer stands. Columbus, California, or anywhere else you want to go. But we need to decide soon. She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, gratitude, mixed with fear and something that might have been hope. If we left, she said slowly, would Ray be able to find us? Eventually, maybe. But it would buy us time to figure out legal options. And distance makes everything harder for people like him. And you'd really want me to come with you, even though I'm nothing but trouble? Marcus thought about Sarah, about the stray cats she'd fed, about the way love sometimes arrived in unexpected packages that changed everything. Kendra, you're not trouble. You're the best thing that's happened to me in 2 years. The admission surprised them both. But as Marcus said the words, he realized they were true. For the first time since Sarah's death, he had a reason to look forward instead of backward, a purpose beyond simply existing from one day to the next. Outside, storm clouds were gathering again, and the late afternoon light was taking on that peculiar golden quality that preceded dramatic weather. Change was coming whether they chose it or not. The only question was whether they'd face it together or apart. The decision to close the diner early felt surreal, like stepping out of a life that no longer fit. Marcus locked the front door at 4 p.m. while Danny loaded the last of the day's supplies into his car. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the empty parking lot, and for the first time in years, Marcus wasn't thinking about tomorrow's breakfast prep. "Are you sure about this?" Danny asked, pausing beside his Honda. "Once word gets out that you're selling, there's no taking it back, I'm sure." Marcus surprised himself with how steady his voice sounded. "Will you be okay finding another job?" Danny shrugged. "I've been thinking about moving back to Columbus anyway. My ex-wife's been saying our daughter needs her dad around more." He glanced toward Kendra, who was waiting by Marcus's truck. "Take care of that girl. She's been through enough." As Danny drove away, Marcus felt the weight of finality settling over him. In the space of 24 hours, his carefully ordered life had exploded into chaos, and somehow that felt like the most natural thing in the world. "Where do we go now?" Kendra asked as they climbed into his truck. "Home first. We need to pack and figure out our next move before Ray regroups." The drive through town felt different, as if Marcus was seeing Millfield through the eyes of someone already gone. The shuttered storefronts on Main Street, the faded optimism of painted murals that promised better days ahead, the general sense of a community slowly emptying, as young people left for bigger cities and older residents passed away. At the house on Maple Drive, Marcus found himself moving with purposeful energy he hadn't felt since Sarah's illness. While Kendra showered and changed into clothes that actually fit her, he began the process of sorting through 30 years of accumulated possessions. The hardest part was Sarah's things. Her clothes still hung in the closet, her books still lined the shelves in the bedroom, her gardening tools still waited in the garage for spring plantings that would never come. Marcus had been unable to touch any of it for 2 years, but now he found himself carefully packing the items that mattered most: photo albums, her grandmother's jewelry, the handwritten recipe cards she'd used to perfect her apple pie. "You don't have to get rid of everything," Kendra said from the doorway, watching him fold Sarah's favorite sweater into a box. "I'm not getting rid of anything important. I'm just deciding what's worth carrying forward." She helped him sort through the practical necessities: clothes, documents, a few pieces of furniture that might be worth shipping. Everything else would stay with the house, which Marcus planned to put on the market as soon as possible. Around 6 o'clock, Marcus's phone rang. Chief Reeves's name appeared on the caller ID. "Marcus, we need to talk. Can you come down to the station? Is this about Ray?" "Among other things. And bring Kendra if she's willing. There've been some developments." The Millfield police station occupied a squat brick building that had been constructed in the 1970s and showed every year of its age. Janet Reeves led them to a small conference room that smelled of stale coffee and industrial carpet. "I'll get straight to the point," Janet said, settling into a plastic chair across from them. "Ray Hutchins retained an attorney this afternoon. Gerald Morrison, you might know him, Marcus. He handles real estate transactions, some family law." Marcus nodded. Morrison was a decent enough lawyer who'd helped him and Sarah with their wills. Years ago, but he wasn't exactly a legal heavyweight. Morrison filed an emergency petition with the county court requesting immediate return of his client's ward. He's claiming that Kendra is mentally unstable and that you, Marcus, have been interfering with a legal guardianship arrangement. Kendra's face went pale. What does that mean? It means there'll be a hearing, probably within the next few days. A judge will review the guardianship documents and decide whether Ray maintains legal authority over you. And if he does? Janet's expression was grim. Then technically, you'd be required to return to his custody. The words hit like a physical blow. Marcus felt Kendra shrink into her chair, all the fragile hope of the past day crumbling in an instant. But there's more, Janet continued. I spent the afternoon making some calls, looking into Ray's background and the circumstances of Linda Walsh's death. What I found is interesting. She opened a manila folder and spread several documents across the table. Linda Walsh died at Millfield General on March 15th of last year. According to her medical records, she'd been in and out of the hospital for 6 months with complications from lung cancer. But here's what's curious. She was supposed to be discharged 2 days before she died. Her oncologist, Dr. Patterson, had cleared her to go home for hospice care. So why didn't she? Marcus asked. Because Ray refused to take her home. Claimed he couldn't handle her care needs, that he didn't have the right equipment. But the hospital social worker noted that Linda seemed distressed about something. She kept asking to speak privately with a counselor. Janet pulled out another document. The day before Linda died, she managed to make a phone call. Hospital records show it went to a law office in Columbus. Brennan, Walsh and Associates. They specialize in elder law and estate planning. Kendra leaned forward. Why would Mom call a lawyer? That's what I wanted to know. So I called them. Turns out Linda Walsh had an appointment scheduled for the day after she died. She wanted to discuss changing her will. The implications hung in the air like smoke. Marcus could see Kendra processing the information, her face cycling through confusion, hope, and anger. She was going to cut Ray out, Kendra said quietly. That's what it looks like. According to the lawyer I spoke with, Linda was concerned about Ray's drinking and his treatment of you. She'd been planning to revise her will to place your inheritance in a trust that Ray couldn't access. But she died before she could change. Exactly. And here's where it gets really interesting. Linda's death was unexpected. Dr. Patterson told me her condition had actually been improving. She should have had weeks, maybe months left. Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. Are you suggesting? I'm not suggesting anything. But I am reopening the investigation into Linda Walsh's death. And I'm requesting an expedited review of Ray's guardianship status based on credible allegations of abuse. The room fell silent as the full implications sank in. If Ray had somehow hastened Linda's death to prevent her from changing her will, then Kendra wasn't just an abuse victim, she was the key witness to potential murder. What do we do now? Kendra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Officially? You should probably accept my sister's offer and go to the shelter in Columbus while we sort this out. It could take weeks or months to investigate Linda's death. Properly and unofficially? Janet studied them both carefully. Unofficially, if you were to leave town for an extended vacation while these legal matters get resolved. I might be too busy with my investigation to notice your absence right away. The suggestion was clear, even wrapped in careful language. Janet was giving them time to disappear before Ray's legal maneuvers could trap them. How much time? Marcus asked. Ray's emergency hearing is scheduled for Monday morning. Today's Friday. If you were going to take that vacation, I'd suggest leaving tonight. Marcus looked at Kendra, seeing his own thoughts reflected in her eyes. They could run, but they'd be running from more than just Ray Hutchins now. They'd be running from a potential murder investigation, from legal complications that could follow them anywhere. There's something else you should know, Janet said. lowering her voice. I did some checking on Ray's finances. He's in debt up to his eyeballs, owes money to 3 different credit card companies, behind on his truck payment, and there's a second mortgage on the house that's about to go into foreclosure. So he really needs that insurance money, Marcus sighed. $50,000 would solve most of his problems, which makes him desperate, and desperate people do dangerous things. As if summoned by her words, Janet's radio crackled to life. She listened to the brief exchange, then turned back to them with a troubled expression. That was dispatch. Ray Hutchins just filed a missing persons report, claiming his mentally unstable ward has disappeared and might be in danger. He's requesting an active search. The noose was tightening. Marcus could feel the walls closing in, the careful life he'd built in Millfield becoming a trap rather than a sanctuary. We need to leave, he said. Tonight. Kendra nodded, fear and determination warring in her expression. Where will we go? Marcus thought about the conversation they'd had earlier, about dreams deferred and possibilities ignored. You said you always wanted to see the ocean. California's a long way from here. Sometimes distance is exactly what you need. They left the police station with Janet's unofficial blessing and a list of contacts. Lawyers who specialized in guardianship cases, victims advocates who understood the complexities of financial abuse, investigators who might be able to help uncover the truth about Linda Walsh's death. Back at the house, they packed with the efficiency of people who understood that their window of opportunity was rapidly closing. Marcus withdrew the maximum daily amount from his bank account and left instructions with his neighbor to handle the initial steps of putting the house on the market. As darkness fell, they loaded Marcus's truck with everything they couldn't bear to leave behind. The rest, furniture, appliances, the accumulated debris of a settled life, would have to wait for professional movers or estate sale companies. Are you sure about this? Kendra asked as they stood in the empty kitchen, surrounded by boxes and the ghosts of better times. Marcus looked around the house where he'd planned to grow old with Sarah, where he'd grieved her loss in solitude for 2 years. It had been a good life, but it was a finished life. What lay ahead was uncertain, possibly dangerous, but it was also alive with possibility. I've never been more sure of anything. They were loading the last boxes when headlights swept across the driveway. Marcus felt his heart stop as a familiar truck pulled up behind them, effectively blocking their escape route. Ray Hutchins climbed out of his vehicle with the deliberate movements of a man who'd been drinking just enough to feel invincible. He wasn't alone. A younger man emerged from the passenger side, someone Marcus didn't recognize, but who carried himself with the swagger of someone accustomed to intimidating people. Going somewhere? Ray's voice carried across the darkness, slurred but dangerous. That Marcus positioned himself between Ray and Kendra, acutely aware that they were trapped in the driveway with nowhere to run. Just taking a trip, Marcus said, trying to keep his voice steady. Funny thing about trips, sometimes people don't come back from them. Ray took a step closer, and Marcus could smell the alcohol on his breath. See, I've been thinking about our conversation today, about how you've been interfering with family business. And I realized something. What's that? Ray smiled, but there was nothing pleasant about it. If something happened to Kendra before she turned 21, that insurance money would come to me anyway. Funny how that works out. The threat was clear and immediate. Marcus felt adrenaline surge through his system as he calculated distances and options. His truck keys were in his pocket, but Ray's vehicle blocked the only exit from the driveway. Ray, you don't want to do this, Marcus sighed. The police are already investigating. The police are investigating Linda's death, not some tragic accident that might happen to her daughter. Ray's companion moved to flank them, cutting off any retreat toward the house. Accidents happen all the time in small towns. House fires, car crashes, young women who disappear and are never found. Kendra stepped out from behind Marcus, her voice surprisingly steady. You killed her, didn't you? "You killed my mother." Ray's expression shifted, and for a moment, Marcus saw something like genuine emotion flicker across his face. Your mother was dying anyway. Cancer was eating her alive, and she was going to change her will and leave us both with nothing. All I did was help her along a little faster. The confession hung in the night air like a curse. Ray had just admitted to murder, in front of witnesses, which meant he had no intention of letting either of them leave alive. Marcus's mind raced through possibilities. The house keys were in his pocket, but the front door was 50 feet away across open ground. His cell phone was in the truck, but Ray's companion was already moving to cut off that avenue of escape. "Here's what's going to happen," Ray continued, pulling something from his jacket that glinted in the porch light. "You're both going to have a terrible accident. Maybe a gas leak explosion, maybe a home invasion gone wrong. The details don't matter. What matters is that when the smoke clears, I'll be the grieving stepfather collecting his inheritance." The knife in Ray's hand caught the light again, and Marcus realized their time for talk was over. Whatever happened next would determine whether they lived to see another sunrise dot in the distance. The sound of sirens began to wail, growing closer with each passing second. Ray's head snapped up, his confidence wavering for the first time. "You called the cops," he snarled. "No," Marcus said, "but someone did." Through the kitchen window, he could see Mrs. Chun's face pressed against the glass of her house next door. A phone held to her ear. The elderly woman had obviously been watching their confrontation and had the good sense to call for help. Ray's companion grabbed his arm. "We need to go, man, right now." But Ray's alcohol-fueled rage had reached the point where rational thought was impossible. Instead of retreating, he lunged forward with the knife, aiming for Marcus's chest. What happened next would change everything for all of them. Time slowed to a crawl as the knife blade sliced through the night air toward Marcus's chest. 32. Years of running a diner had given him quick reflexes, and he twisted sideways just as the steel passed through the space where his heart had been a split second earlier. The blade caught his jacket instead, tearing through the fabric and scoring a shallow cut across his ribs. Ray's momentum carried him forward, and Marcus grabbed the man's wrist, trying to control the weapon. They grappled in the driveway, feet scrabbling for purchase on the loose gravel while Kendra screamed behind them. "Run!" Marcus shouted, wrestling for control of the knife. "Get to the neighbors." But Ray's companion was already moving to intercept her escape route. The younger man was faster than Ray, soberer, and clearly more experienced with violence. He caught Kendra around the waist as she tried to sprint toward Mrs. Chun's house, lifting her off the ground despite her desperate struggles. "Let her go." Marcus's distraction cost him precious seconds. Ray broke free of his grip and raised the knife again, this time aiming for Marcus's throat. The blade was inches from its target when the first police cruiser screamed into the driveway, emergency lights painting the scene in strobing red and blue. The sudden burst of illumination froze everyone in place like actors caught between scenes. Millfield Police dropped the weapon. Officer Rodriguez, Janet Reeves's newest deputy, had his service pistol drawn and trained on Ray before the man could react. Behind him, a second cruiser pulled up, disgorging Chief Reeves herself with her own weapon ready. Ray looked around wildly, still holding the knife but clearly realizing his situation had become hopeless. His companion immediately released Kendra and raised his hands, smart enough to recognize when a fight was over. "It's not what it looks like," Ray slurred, swaying slightly but still gripping the knife. "This man was kidnapping my stepdaughter. I was defending myself by attacking him with a knife in his own driveway." Janet's voice carried professional skepticism. "Ray, put the weapon down, now." The standoff stretched for what felt like hours, but was probably only seconds. Marcus could see Ray's alcohol-clouded mind trying to calculate odds, looking for an escape route that didn't exist. The sirens had attracted attention from the entire neighborhood. Porch lights were coming on. Curious faces appeared at windows, and Mrs. Shunn had emerged from her house with a baseball bat clutched in her arthritic hands. "You don't understand," Ray said, his voice taking on a wheedling tone. "She's my responsibility. Her mother left her to me, and this man has been filling her head with lies. Look at her, she's obviously been abused, but not by me. By him. It was a last-ditch attempt to shift blame, but Janet had heard Ray's earlier confession about Linda's death. Her expression remained stone-cold professional as she advanced slowly, weapon trained on his center mass. "Ray Hutchins, you're under arrest for assault with a deadly weapon, attempted murder, and interfering with a police investigation. You have the right to remain silent. This is bullshit." Ray's control finally snapped completely. "You're all in on it. The whole damn town's been turned against me by this lying little bitch and her middle-aged boyfriend." He took a step toward Kendra, knife still raised, and Officer Rodriguez didn't hesitate. The taser barbs hit Ray center mass, 50,000 volts, dropping him to the gravel like a felled tree. The knife clattered harmlessly away as his body convulsed, then went limp. "Outstanding police work," Janet said dryly as Rodriguez moved to secure the weapon and handcuff the unconscious Ray. "Tommy, read him his rights when he wakes up. And get paramedics out here to check him over." She turned to Ray's companion, who was still standing with his hands raised. "What's your name, son?" "Derek Vaughn. Look, I didn't know he had a knife, okay? He just asked me to drive him over here, said he needed to pick up his stepdaughter. I don't want any trouble." Janet studied the young man's face, clearly evaluating his truthfulness. "How long have you known Ray?" "Couple weeks. We work together at the shipping warehouse. He's been buying rounds at Murphy's Tavern, talking about coming into some money soon. When he asked for a ride tonight, I figured why not. Did you hear what Ray said earlier about Linda Walsh's death?" Derek's face went pale as the implication sank in. "He was drunk, talking crazy. I didn't think he meant any of it." "Well, he did. And you're going to need to give a formal statement about everything you heard tonight." As the paramedics arrived to check on Ray and assess Marcus's minor knife wound, Janet pulled Marcus and Kendra aside for a private conversation. "This changes everything," she said quietly. "Ray just confessed to murder in front of multiple witnesses. He's not going to see the outside of a prison cell for a very long time." "What about guardianship?" Kendra asked, her voice shaking with reaction. "Ray Hutchins is no longer in any position to claim guardianship over anyone. But there will still be legal complications. The state will want to investigate the entire situation. Make sure you're properly protected." Marcus found himself thinking about the packed truck, the plans they'd made to disappear into the night. "Do we still need to leave?" "That's up to you. The immediate threat is over, but there'll be trials, depositions, media attention. Small towns don't usually handle murder cases very well, especially when they involve local families." Kendra looked at Marcus with an expression he couldn't quite read. "What do you want to do?" It was a fair question, and Marcus realized he didn't have a simple answer. The adrenaline of the past hour was wearing off, leaving him drained and shaky. Everything he'd planned to leave behind was still here in Millfield, the house, the diner, the familiar routines of a small-town life. But Kendra was here too, and somehow that changed the entire equation. "Let's go inside," he said. "We can figure out the rest tomorrow." The next few hours passed in a blur of police statements, evidence collection, and paperwork. Ray regained consciousness in the back of the ambulance, immediately demanding lawyers and claiming police brutality. His companion, Derek Vaughn, proved surprisingly cooperative once he understood the seriousness of the situation. By midnight, the circus had finally moved on. Ray was in a holding cell awaiting arraignment. Derek had been released after giving his statement, and the crime scene tape had been removed from Marcus's driveway. The neighborhood had returned to its usual quiet, though Marcus suspected the gossip would continue for weeks. Inside the house, Kendra sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea she wasn't drinking, staring at the boxes they'd packed for their escape. "It feels weird," she said finally. "What does?" "Being safe. I've been scared for so long, I don't remember what normal feels like." Marcus understood the feeling. After Sarah's death, he'd grown so accustomed to grief that happiness felt foreign, almost suspicious. "Maybe we don't have to figure out normal right away," he said. "Maybe we can figure out what comes next instead." She looked up at him, and Marcus saw something different in her expression, not the desperate hope of someone clinging to a lifeline, but the thoughtful consideration of someone weighing genuine options. "Janet said there'll be a trial. Ray's lawyer will probably try to make me look unstable, claim I made everything up for attention or money. You'll have support. Janet, the prosecutor, victims' advocates, and me, if you want it." "What about the diner, your life here?" Marcus thought about Danny's blunt assessment earlier that day, the failing business, the empty house, the general sense of holding on to something that was already gone. Maybe it's time for a change anyway. The diner's been losing money for years, and I've been too stubborn to admit it. As for the rest, he gestured around the kitchen where he'd eaten countless meals alone. "This place has too many ghosts. So, we still leave, if that's what you want. But now it would be a choice, not running away." Kendra was quiet for a long moment, processing everything that had happened. "My mother always talked about California. She grew up there before she met my father, said the ocean was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. After he died and we moved to Ohio, she promised we'd go back someday." "What stopped you?" "Money, mostly. Then she got sick and Ray came along, and ... She shrugged. "Life got in the way." Marcus found himself thinking about the conversation they'd had earlier, about dreams deferred and possibilities ignored. "What if life stopped getting in the way?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if we honored your mother's dream? Drove to California, saw the ocean, figured out what comes next from there." The suggestion hung between them like a bridge waiting to be crossed. Marcus could see Kendra weighing the possibilities, testing the idea against her fears and hopes. "It would take weeks for the legal stuff to get sorted out here," she said slowly. "Janet said the prosecutor might not even need me for months, depending on how Ray's lawyer wants to play things. So we'd have time. You'd really want to do that? Just pack up and drive west with someone you've known for less than a week?" Marcus smiled. "Kendra, 24 hours ago I was planning to spend the rest of my life running a dying diner in a dying town. Tonight I fought off a knife-wielding murderer and watched the police arrest the man who's been terrorizing you. I think I'm ready for a little adventure." She laughed then, the first genuine laugh he'd heard from her since they'd met. It transformed her face completely, erasing years of fear and revealing the young woman she might have been in different circumstances. "When would we leave? Tomorrow? Next week?" "Whenever you're ready." "And what about?" She gestured vaguely, encompassing the complications of their unusual relationship. "I mean, what are we exactly? I can't keep depending on you forever." It was a fair question, and Marcus realized he'd been avoiding thinking about it too carefully. What were they? A lonely widower and a traumatized teenager thrown together by circumstance? A found family born from mutual need? Something else entirely? "We're two people who've been through hell and came out the other side together," he said finally. "Everything else we can figure out as we go." She nodded, seeming satisfied with that answer. "Okay, let's do it. Let's go see the ocean." The decision felt both momentous and perfectly natural, like stepping off a cliff and discovering you could fly. Marcus looked around the kitchen one more time, saying goodbye to the ghosts that had kept him company for too long. "We should probably get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's going to be busy. We'll need to talk to Janet about the legal procedures, arrange for someone to handle the house sale, pack properly for a real trip instead of just running away." Marcus? Kendra's voice was soft, uncertain. Thank you. For everything. For believing me. For protecting me. For... She trailed off, unable to find words for the enormity of what he'd done. Thank you for asking if you could stay forever. He replied. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be needed. As they headed upstairs to their respective rooms, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced in years: excitement about the future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new complications, new possibilities. But for the first time since Sarah's death, he was looking forward to finding out what came next. Behind them, the boxes sat waiting in the kitchen, ready for whatever adventure lay ahead. And somewhere to the west, beyond the mountains and deserts and endless highways, the Pacific Ocean waited under the stars, as vast and full of promise as the journey that would take them there. In her room, Kendra lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sound of safety. No footsteps in the hallway, no angry voices, no fear of what morning might bring. Just the quiet breathing of an old house settling into sleep, and the distant hum of traffic from people going about their normal lives. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to dream about the future instead of just surviving the present. California, college, maybe. A job that didn't require hiding bruises or making excuses. A life where she could be the person her mother had hoped she'd become. It seemed impossible. But then again, 24 hours ago, being safe had seemed impossible too. Outside, Millfield slept under a canopy of stars, unaware that come morning, two of its residents would begin a journey that would change everything they thought they knew about family, hope, and the courage it takes to start over when life gives you a second chance. Dawn broke over Millfield with the kind of crisp clarity that followed violent storms, as if the world had been washed clean and was ready to start fresh. Marcus woke to the smell of coffee brewing and the sound of someone humming in his kitchen, a melody he didn't recognize but that seemed to fill the empty spaces in his house with something that had been missing for years. Kendra stood at the stove making pancakes, wearing one of Sarah's old aprons over her jeans. The morning light streaming through the window had transformed her bruised face, somehow making the healing cuts and fading marks look like evidence of survival rather than defeat. Sleep well? Marcus asked, accepting the coffee mug she offered. Better than I have in months. I kept waiting to hear footsteps in the hallway, but then I remembered. She smiled, a real smile this time. Ray's in jail. The simple statement carried the weight of a life sentence, commuted to freedom. Marcus had seen that same expression on Sarah's face the day the doctors told her the experimental treatment was working, that she might have more time than they'd feared. Any regrets about last night? About deciding to head west? Kendra flipped the pancake with practiced ease. The only regret I have is waiting so long to get away from him. What about you? Having second thoughts about traveling across the country with a teenager you barely know? Marcus considered the question seriously. In the cold light of morning, their plan could seem impulsive, even reckless. A 54-year-old widower and an 18-year-old abuse survivor hitting the road together would raise eyebrows anywhere they went. No second thoughts, he said finally. But we should probably talk about practicalities. They spent breakfast planning logistics with the methodical attention to detail that had kept Thompson's Corner Diner running for 3 decades. Money first. Marcus's savings would cover expenses for several months if they were careful. Transportation. His truck was reliable but would need a tune-up before any cross-country journey. Legal issues. Janet Reeves had assured them that Kendra's testimony wouldn't be needed for weeks, possibly months. There's something else we need to discuss, Marcus said as they cleared the breakfast dishes. People are going to talk. About U.S. leaving town? About us traveling together. A man my age and a woman your age. People will make assumptions. Kendra's expression hardened slightly. Let them. After everything I've been through, gossip from strangers doesn't scare me. It might affect you in ways you don't expect. Job applications, housing, relationships. People can be cruel when they think they have moral high ground. She was quiet for a moment, considering this. Are you trying to talk me out of going? No, I'm trying to make sure you understand what you're choosing. Marcus, for 6 months, I lived with a man who told me every day that I was worthless, that nobody would ever believe me or help me or care what happened to me. Last night you literally fought for my life with a knife-wielding drunk. If people want to gossip about that, let them. The fierce determination in her voice reminded Marcus why he'd been drawn to help her in the first place. Kendra Walsh had been beaten down but never broken, bent but never shattered. Around 10 o'clock, Chief Reeves arrived to update them on Ray's situation. She looked tired but satisfied, the expression of a cop who'd finally managed to arrest someone who'd been getting away with crimes for too long. Ray's been formally charged with assault with a deadly weapon, attempted murder, and we're working with the county prosecutor on charges related to Linda's death, Janet reported. His lawyer's already talking about a plea deal. What kind of plea deal? Marcus asked. Depends on what the medical examiner finds when they exhume Linda's body. If we can prove Ray accelerated her death, he's looking at murder charges. If not, maybe involuntary manslaughter or elder abuse. Kendra winced at the mention of exhuming her mother's body, but her voice was steady when she spoke. How long will all this take? Months, maybe a year. These things move slowly, especially when they involve changing cause of death determinations. Janet studied Kendra's face. Which brings me to why I'm really here. Are you two seriously planning to leave town? We're thinking about it, Marcus said carefully. Well, think fast. Word's already getting around about last night, and not all of it's accurate. Some folks are saying you attacked Ray, that the whole thing was a setup to get access to Linda's insurance money. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Who's saying that? Ray's friends mostly. His brother drove over from Kentucky this morning, making noise about how his family's being railroaded by corrupt local police and some middle-aged predator who's manipulating a grief-stricken teenager. The ugly implications hung in the air, like a toxic cloud. Marcus could see how the story might be twisted, how their genuine connection could be portrayed as something sinister. What do you recommend? He asked, honestly. Get out of town for a while. Let the legal process work itself out. Let the gossip die down. When you come back, if you come back, things will have settled. And if we don't come back? Janet shrugged. Then you'll have found something better somewhere else. Either way, you win. After Janet left, Marcus and Kendra spent the afternoon making phone calls and arrangements. The house would go on the market immediately, with a local realtor handling showings and negotiations. The diner's equipment would be sold to a restaurant supply company in Columbus. Bank accounts would be transferred to institutions with national branches. By evening, their entire lives had been reduced to what would fit in the bed of Marcus's pickup truck. It's strange, Kendra said, looking around the now empty living room. I spent so long dreaming about escaping, but I never thought about what came after the escape. What do you mean? I mean, I know what I'm running from, but I'm not sure what I'm running to. What if we get to California and I don't know how to be happy? What if I'm so used to being afraid that I don't know how to live without it? Marcus understood the fear. After Sarah's death, he'd been terrified of letting go of his grief because it was the last connection he had to her. Moving forward had felt like betrayal. Maybe happiness isn't the goal, he said. Maybe the goal is just living without fear long enough to figure out what comes next. She nodded, seeming to find comfort in that perspective. Will you tell me about Sarah sometime? About what it was like to be happy. The question caught him off guard. He'd spent 2 years avoiding conversations about his late wife, deflecting well-meaning inquiries from neighbors and customers. But somehow Kendra's request felt different, not prying or pitying, just curious about what a healthy relationship looked like. Yeah, he said, I'd like that. They spent their last evening in Millfield, sitting on the front porch, watching the sun set over a town that had been Marcus's entire adult world until 48 hours ago. Mrs. Chun waved from her kitchen window, and the teenagers next door played basketball in their driveway with the casual confidence of people who'd never had to worry about violence erupting without warning. "Do you think we're doing the right thing?" Kendra asked as darkness settled. Over Maple Drive, "I think we're doing the brave thing. Whether it's right or wrong, we'll find out along the way." "I've never been brave before. You survived Ray Hutchins for 6 months. You fought back when he tried to rape you. You asked a stranger for help when you had nowhere else to turn. You've been brave your whole life, you just didn't know it." The insight seemed to surprise her. "I always felt like a coward. Like I should have fought back sooner, should have found a way to protect my mother." "Kendra, you were a kid dealing with an adult who used his size and authority to hurt people. Survival isn't cowardice, it's intelligence." They sat in comfortable silence as the streetlights came on, each lost in their own thoughts about the journey ahead. Tomorrow they would drive west toward an ocean neither of them had seen, toward a future they couldn't imagine but were finally free to choose. "Marcus," Kendra's voice was soft in the darkness, "whatever happens out there, thank you for giving me a chance to find out who I am when I'm not scared. Thank you for reminding me that life doesn't end when the person you love dies. Sometimes it just changes direction." The next morning dawned clear and cold, perfect weather for traveling. They loaded the last of their belongings into the truck while the neighborhood watched with the polite curiosity of people who'd heard rumors but didn't know which version to believe. Marcus took one final walk through his empty house, saying goodbye to rooms that had held 30 years of memories. In the bedroom he'd shared with Sarah, he paused at the window where she used to watch birds at the feeder he'd built for her birthday. "I'm going to be okay," he said aloud, not sure if he was talking to Sarah or himself. "We both are." When he returned to the truck, Kendra was studying a road atlas spread across the hood. "I've been thinking about routes," she said. "We could take the interstate and be in California in 3 days, or we could take back roads and see some country. Make it an actual journey instead of just getting from here to there." Marcus looked at the map, at the thin lines representing thousands of miles of possibility. "What do you want to do? Take the long way." "I've spent my whole life rushing to get through bad situations. For once, I'd like to enjoy the trip, the long way it is." As they climbed into the truck, Marcus caught sight of Mrs. Chun standing in her doorway. The elderly woman raised her hand in farewell, and he waved back, grateful for neighbors who called police when they saw trouble brewing. The engine turned over with the reliable rumble of a vehicle that had been well maintained and was ready for adventure. Marcus adjusted the rearview mirror and caught his reflection, a middle-aged man whose eyes looked alive for the first time in years. Beside him, Kendra buckled her seatbelt and rolled down her window despite the cold air. "Ready?" "More than ready." They pulled out of the driveway as the sun climbed higher, painting the October morning in shades of gold and amber. Behind them, Millfield settled into its usual rhythms, already beginning the process of turning their story into legend. Ahead, the road stretched toward horizons they'd never seen, carrying them toward possibilities they were only beginning to imagine. As they reached the edge of town, Kendra pointed to a sign that read, "Millfield, population 2,847. Below it, someone had painted Home of the Fighting Eagles in faded blue. Letters, population 2,845 now, she said. Marcus smiled. "Think we'll be back? Maybe someday. But not to stay. How do you know?" "Because I'm finally going somewhere instead of just getting away from somewhere. That feels different." The insight was profound in its simplicity. Marcus had spent 2 years stuck in place, afraid to move forward because movement meant leaving Sarah behind. But now he understood that carrying someone's memory didn't require staying in the same physical location. Love was portable, grief was transformable, and life had more chapters than he'd thought possible. 20 miles out of town, they stopped at a gas station to fill up and buy snacks for the road. As Marcus pumped gas, Kendra emerged from the convenience store with an armload of supplies and something he'd never seen before, genuine excitement in her eyes. "I bought us a camera," she said, holding up a disposable model. "I want to document this trip. Every state, every sunset, every moment we figure out who we're becoming." Marcus looked at this young woman who'd asked if she could stay forever and had somehow managed to save them both in the process. "That sounds perfect." They climbed back into the truck, bellies full of gas station coffee and hearts full of possibilities. The radio crackled to life with a classic rock station, and Kendra sang along to songs she'd learned before Ray Hutchins became part of her life. As they merged onto the highway heading west, Marcus felt something he hadn't experienced since before. Sarah got sick, the pure, uncomplicated joy of being alive and having somewhere to go. Behind them, their past receded into memory. Ahead, the future waited like an unopened gift, full of promise and mystery and all the adventures that come to people brave enough to choose hope over fear. The journey to the ocean had begun. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly before them, painted in shades of blue that had no names in any language Kendra had ever learned. She stood barefoot in the sand, waves lapping at her toes, while seagulls wheeled overhead in lazy circles. "It's bigger than I imagined," she said, her voice almost lost in the sound of surf. Marcus stood beside her, his own shoes abandoned somewhere. "Up the beach. Your mother was right. It is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen." They'd been in California for 2 weeks now, having taken the long route through Colorado, Utah, and Nevada. Each state had revealed new landscapes, new possibilities, new versions of themselves they hadn't known existed. Kendra had filled 3 disposable cameras with pictures of snow-capped mountains, desert sunrises, and endless highways that led toward dreams instead of away from nightmares. The cottage they'd rented in Monterey was small but perfect too. Bedrooms, a kitchen that smelled like sea salt, and windows that framed the ocean like living paintings. Marcus had found work at a family-owned restaurant downtown, his decades of diner experience translating easily to California cuisine. Kendra was enrolled in community college classes that would start in January, her acceptance letter sitting proudly on the kitchen table next to the guidebooks for 4-year universities. "The lawyer called this morning," Marcus said, pulling out his phone to check messages they'd both been avoiding. Kendra's stomach tightened reflexively. Even here, thousands of miles from Ohio, the legal proceedings surrounding Ray's case still had the power to darken perfect moments. "What did she say?" "Ray pled guilty to voluntary manslaughter in your mother's death. 25 years to life, no possibility of parole for 15 years. The guardianship has been officially dissolved, and the insurance money is being released to you with no restrictions." The waves continued their eternal rhythm while Kendra processed this information. $50,000. Financial freedom. The ability to pay for college without debt. To build a future without looking over her shoulder. "I thought I'd feel different," she said finally. "More relieved, maybe. Instead, I just feel empty. Justice doesn't heal everything. It just makes it possible to start healing." They walked further down the beach, past families building sandcastles and surfers waiting for perfect waves. The afternoon sun was beginning its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in watercolors. That shifted with each passing minute. "Marcus?" Kendra's voice carried a note of uncertainty he hadn't heard in weeks. "What happens now?" "What do you mean?" "I mean we've been running towards something for 6 weeks, and now we're here. What comes next?" It was a fair question, and one Marcus had been avoiding thinking about too carefully. Their cross-country journey had provided structure, purpose, and a clear destination. But now that they'd reached the ocean, The future was an open question again. "What do you want to happen?" he asked. Kendra picked up a piece of sea glass, worn smooth by countless tides. "I want to stay here. I want to go to school and learn something useful. I want to wake up every morning without being afraid." She paused, rolling the glass between her fingers. "But I also want you to be happy, and I don't know if California is what you need." Marcus had been wrestling with similar thoughts. The restaurant job was fine, but it wasn't a calling. The cottage was beautiful, but it wasn't home in the way his house in Millfield had been. He'd been so focused on helping Kendra escape her past that he hadn't given much thought to what he wanted from his own future. "You know what I realized yesterday?" he said. "For 2 years after Sarah died, I kept waiting for my life to start again. I thought if I just waited long enough, grieved properly enough, eventually I'd wake up and know what came next. But life doesn't pause while you figure things out. It keeps moving whether you're ready or not. So what does that mean? It means maybe happiness isn't a destination you reach. Maybe it's something you build, day by day, choice by choice." They found a piece of driftwood to sit on, watching pelicans dive for fish in the surf. The beach was beginning to empty as families headed home for dinner, leaving them with the kind of solitude that invited honest conversation. "Kendra, I need to ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly." She nodded, bracing herself for whatever serious question was coming. "Do you still need me?" The question clearly caught her off guard. "What kind of need?" "The desperate kind. The kind that brought you to my diner that first night. Because if you do, then everything we've built together is still based on crisis rather than choice." She was quiet for a long time, watching waves chase each other up the beach. "I'll always be grateful for what you did for me. And I'll always care about you, probably love you in whatever weird way this relationship is. But need you?" She shook her head slowly. "Not the way I did before. I can take care of myself now." The admission should have been devastating, but instead Marcus felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The frightened girl who'd shown up at his diner 6 weeks ago had grown into a young woman capable of independence and choice. "Good," he said. "Because I don't want to be needed anymore. I want to be chosen. What's the difference? Need is about survival. Choice is about love." Kendra smiled, understanding blooming in her expression. "So what are you choosing?" Marcus looked out at the ocean, at the endless horizon that seemed to promise infinite possibilities. "I'm choosing to stay in California for a while. Not because you need protecting, but because I want to see what kind of person I become when I'm not defined by loss. I'm choosing to help you through college if you'll let me, not as a father figure or guardian, but as someone who believes in your potential. And I'm choosing to figure out what the rest of my life looks like when it's built on hope instead of habit. And I'm choosing to let you," Kendra said. "Not because I can't make it alone, but because some journeys are better shared." The sun was setting now, painting the water in shades of gold and crimson. Other couples and families had gathered along the shoreline to watch nature's daily masterpiece. But Marcus and Kendra sat in comfortable silence, each lost in their own thoughts about the future they were choosing to build together. "Marcus?" Kendra's voice was soft, almost lost in the sound of waves. "Thank you for showing me the difference between being saved and saving yourself. Thank you for reminding me that sometimes the best way to honor the past is to stop living in it." As the last sliver of sun disappeared into the Pacific, they stood and brushed sand from their clothes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: Kendra's college applications, Marcus's search for a more permanent job, the practical details of building a life in a place they'd never expected to call home. But tonight, they walked back toward their cottage with the satisfaction of people who had traveled far and arrived exactly where they were supposed to be. Behind them, their footprints in the sand would be erased by the incoming tide. Ahead, the lights of Monterey twinkled like earthbound stars, welcoming them home, 6 weeks ago, Kendra had asked if she could stay forever. Now they both understood that forever wasn't about place or time, it was about choosing, again and again, to build something beautiful from the broken pieces of what came before. The ocean would be there tomorrow, vast and full of possibilities, reminding them that some horizons are meant to be reached while others exist simply to call us forward into whatever adventure comes next. And somewhere in Ohio, autumn leaves were falling on empty lots where dreams used to be, while in California, two people who had found each other in the darkness were finally learning what it meant to live in the light. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.